Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So Halloween is approaching and the next three cases that I have planned for you are definitely more on the disturbing side. They are a little bit more Halloween-y themed. They're not Halloween, but they're just a little bit more disturbing and just creepy and yeah. And the case that we are going to start with today is the case of Pazuzu Algarad, also known as the Satanist in the suburbs. So Pazuzu was a young man and he was obsessed with black magic. He was obsessed with all things occult, and he was also a self-proclaimed Satanist. He performed all kinds of disturbing rituals, including drinking the blood of animals and humans. On top of this, Pazuzu, he really admired Charles Manson, so he kind of built a little cult around himself. It wasn't like a cult, but it definitely was a cult-like group of people, and Pazuzu was obviously the leader. And Pazuzu had this house where all of these people would gather, and it would be a crazy party house, and this house was so disgusting. Ugh. And Pazuzu also had spiritual wives. He had multiple fiancées, so very Charles Manson vibes. And in the end, because Pazuzu was the leader of this group of people, it went to his head, and it all ended in terrible circumstances. And Pazuzu and his wives would be responsible for multiple tragedies. So that is what we are talking about today. So let's dive in. So I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor. And this truly feels like a surreal moment right now. I have wanted to work with this company, this game, for a very long time. I have been playing this game since I was at university, which was a while ago now. So I just want to thank Heyday for sponsoring today's video. Heyday is a free to download mobile game where you get to run your own little slice of country paradise by building a farm, raising animals, growing crops, selling produce, exploring the valley, and so much more. I cannot tell you guys how much of a big part Heyday has been in my life. Like, I discovered Heyday when I was back in university, my first year at university, and I've been playing this game for years. And Heyday contains everything that I love in a game. The thing I love most though is that there's always something to do. Whether that is fulfilling customer orders or boat orders or selling on my farm shop, Heyday has truly captured what it possibly would be like to have your own farm. And this is what my farm currently looks like. There's a bit more down here. I have all my crops here. I have all of my animals in the back. I have all of like my ovens and my grill and sewing, sugar and all stuff like that on the side. Need to collect my little bacon pie there. But the main reason why I love Heyday is that it's just so relaxing. I can just open up Heyday multiple times a day and work on little aspects of my farm, and I just find it so comforting. It really is just like such a cozy game. I don't know why, but Heyday just always reminds me of autumn. I don't know, maybe it's because you grow pumpkins. You grow pumpkins, And we are actually in autumn. We're heading into spooky season. And as I already said, I am going to be covering some more disturbing cases in this spooky season. But one thing that Heyday wants you all to know is that nothing bad ever really happens in Heyday. It's just such a happy place. And Heyday are going to be running a ton of activities for Halloween. There will be special events, spooky decorations for your farm, and I cannot wait. It is just the ultimate relaxation, cozy game. And honestly, if you have never played Heyday, if you like the same kind of games as I do, I know you are going to be obsessed. And with all of the spookiness going on in the game right now is the perfect time to start playing. So if you wanted to check out Heyday for yourself, you can download the game using the link in my description box or by scanning the QR code that is on your screen right now. And using that link in my description box rather than going to the App Store really does help out this channel. So I just want to give a huge thank you to Heyday. Like, truly, I cannot believe it. It feels like a full circle moment right now. I was playing Heyday before I even decided I wanted to make YouTube videos. But thank you to every single one of you watching right now, because truly, without all of you guys, I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Pazuzu Algarad was born on the 12th of August 1978, making him a Leo. Now, Pazuzu Algarad is not actually his real name. His real name is John Alexander Lawson, and he legally changed his name to Pazuzu Algarad, but I'm just going to call him Pazuzu, otherwise it's just going to get confusing. And he was born in California to parents Cynthia and Timothy Lawson. He was an only child, and when Pazuzu was 2 years old, the whole family relocated to Winston-Salem in North Carolina. And this is not Salem as in like Salem witches, that is in Massachusetts. When I originally started my research and I was like, Salem is in Salem witches. No, different Salem. I'm also filming this video on Friday the 13th. So yeah, very creepy. But anyway, Pazuzu, he had a pretty normal childhood for his early years. He was described as a happy, athletic child. However, when Pazuzu was 8 years old, this is where everything started to go really downhill. And it all started with his parents getting divorced. So his dad, Timothy, after the divorce, he moved back to California. And Pazuzu actually never saw his dad ever again. I don't know why. The dad just literally packed up and left, but he did. So now it's just Pazuzu and his mom, Cynthia. And pretty much immediately after the divorce, Cynthia got remarried to a man called Johnny James. So Pazuzu now had this new stepfather, and it was not a good situation. Pazuzu absolutely hated his stepdad, which you can understand. I don't know if this Johnny James was a bad person or not, but you have to look at it from Pazuzu's point of view. His parents have literally just gotten divorced. His dad has moved back to California, and now he doesn't see his dad. And now all of a sudden, he has this new father figure in his life. It's almost like for Pazuzu, his dad has just been replaced. And Pazuzu was having none of it. He was like, no. Pazuzu and his stepdad, they would always be arguing, they would be at each other's throats. And Pazuzu just isolated himself completely. When he came home from school, he wouldn't talk to anyone and he would just lock himself in his room. And Cynthia, instead of doing something about this situation, maybe making the transition a little bit easier, she decided to ignore everything. She decided that she didn't really want to acknowledge the fact that her son didn't get on with her new husband. Instead, she decided to spoil Pazuzu rotten. When it came to Pazuzu, there was no such thing as the word no. She would get Pazuzu whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. There were no rules. And it's actually said that Pazuzu ruled the house with an iron fist. So yeah, the kid here is ruling the house. And when Pazuzu was 13 years old, his mom and stepdad did take him to counseling to try and get him some professional help. But even at a young age, Pazuzu was very skilled in manipulation, because when he was having counseling, he convinced the counselor that he was not the problem. It was actually his mom and stepdad that was the problem. And the counselor believed him. And all of this tension resulted in the stepdad actually walking out on the family. So now it's just Pazuzu and Cynthia. And his mom spiraled. She started drinking excessively in the house. She stopped taking care of Pazuzu. She stopped taking care of herself. She just kind of checked out. And it wasn't long until she started inviting random men, a lot of random men, into the home, and she would just have sex with these men around her son. Now, I'm not sure if she was having sex with all of these men in front of her son, but to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised. However, she was having a lot of sex around her son, and her son was very aware of what was going on. And Pazuzu at this point is far too young to be around this. No one would want to be around that, as like that's your parent. And it has been said that this was very traumatizing for Pazuzu. And from this point going forward, the problems in Pazuzu's teenage life would just continue to stack up. So first of all, because Pazuzu's mom stopped taking care of him and also the household, Pazuzu's personal hygiene completely plummeted. Pazuzu just stopped showering. His clothes were not being washed. He stopped using deodorant. And as you can imagine, someone that doesn't take care of their hygiene, they do start to smell. So Pazuzu, he faced a lot of bullying at school because he was always so dirty and he always smelled so bad. The other kids actually started calling him Turd Boy. And Pazuzu didn't take kindly to this, and he got into a lot of fights because of the bullying and the name calling. And Pazuzu just kind of became a little bit of an outcast. He fell out with his friends. Pazuzu started dressing differently to everybody else. He shaved his head, and he was just not always the nicest person to be around. And this resulted in him becoming incredibly isolated. And this was when Pazuzu started to develop really bad anxiety. And his anxiety, because it kind of went untreated, it just got worse and worse. And it soon got to a point where he didn't want to leave the house. He never wanted to go to school. So his mom took him to a psychiatrist. And this is when Pazuzu was diagnosed as being psychotic. He also had schizophrenia, and he was also diagnosed with agoraphobia. Now, agoraphobia, very simply, is somebody that has a fear of crowded places, of maybe going outside of their house, facing situations that are out of their control, and also entering locations where there is not a clear exit. But Pazuzu had this, and he struggled to leave his own home. He struggled to go to school. He struggled with those situations. And it was strongly recommended that Pazuzu receive treatment for all of his diagnoses. However, treatment was very, very expensive, and Cynthia just couldn't afford the treatment for her son. So all of his mental health conditions, they just went untreated. So eventually Pazuzu did start going back to school, but he just became an absolute nightmare. He started vandalizing the school, acting out. He was always in trouble. And to help cope with his mental health and for just everything that is going on at home as well, because you have to remember that Cynthia, she's not exactly the best mom right now. Pazuzu, at the age of 13, turned to drugs and alcohol to cope. Now you may be thinking, where the hell does a 13-year-old get their hands on drugs and alcohol? Well, I'll tell you where he got them from. His own mother. Cynthia would buy her son a pack of beer every single day, and Pazuzu, as a 13-year-old, would drink 12 cans of beer every single day. It's unbelievable. So Pazuzu is very isolated, alone, and he's basically a 13-year-old alcoholic at this point. There was one more thing that Pazuzu turned to cope with his world, his life, and his anxieties, and that was Satanism. He was also obsessed with magic. From a young child, Pazuzu became obsessed with horror films. He was obsessed with films like Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Exorcist. He was always dressing up as characters from horror films all year round, not just on Halloween, all year round. He was always seen running around dressed up as a vampire or a werewolf. And as a 13-year-old, Pazuzu started to learn about black magic and witchcraft. And within no time at all, Pazuzu genuinely believed that he had powers. He would tell all of his classmates that he could move objects with his mind, that he could control the weather, and that he could also make terrible things happen to people that he didn't like. And of course, his classmates only bullied him more for this. But for Pazuzu, he took this very seriously. He started poring over books on magic and how to cast spells on people, how to control other people's mind, influence them, how to get them to do what he wants. And this is when he started to dabble in his own brand of Satanism. And when I refer to Satanism in this case, I actually do mean worshipping Satan. I'm not talking about the Church of Satan. That is not what Pazuzu was into. He started reading about animal sacrifices and rituals, and he actually did start to perform animal sacrifices. And I don't know the exact details of these animal sacrifices, but I do know that he killed a number of animals and drained their blood and drank some of their blood. And the animals were like birds and rabbits, and it's just horrifying. Now, it wasn't long until Pazuzu became the talk of the town, because where Pazuzu grew up, it was a very extremely religious Christian town. So as you can imagine, somebody claiming to be a Satanist, running around dressed as a vampire, claiming that they are into dark magic, that they have powers, everyone was horrified. So Pazuzu carries on his spiral. His mental health is just getting worse and worse. And then when he is 14 years old, he dropped out of school altogether. His agoraphobia had gotten so bad that he literally couldn't leave the house. It got so bad that Pazuzu just shut himself in his room. He just shut himself away from the world. And over the next few years, he really withdrew into himself. He spent long stretches of time in the house completely on his own. And when he was alone, he was drinking heavily. He was taking drugs. He was taking hard drugs. He was also on certain medication for his mental health, such as Zoloft. And just the medication, the drugs, the alcohol, it was a recipe for disaster. And the only person that he ever had any contact with was his mom. And it wasn't until Pazuzu was 18 years old that he started to come out of his shell again. So when you realize that he has been isolated from the world really for 4 years, that is a long time. And when he was 18, he did start to receive disability benefits for his agoraphobia. However, he wanted a bit more money than what he was getting on disability, so he decided to deal drugs. So because he was dealing drugs, this did force him to leave his home, and he was interacting with a lot of clients. And it wasn't long until Pazuzu realized that his clients that he had, they were all very similar to him. All the people that he was interacting with were outcasts, forgotten by society, struggled with their mental health. And Pazuzu realized that he actually got along with his clients, which kind of gave him confidence. Pazuzu finally feels like he's found his people. However, Pazuzu definitely uses this confidence in the wrong way, but we'll get to that. But anyway, Pazuzu is now meeting all of these new people. He feels more confident and he wants to create a new identity. He wants to get rid of the old person that he was. And this is when he changes his name from John Alexander Lawson to Pazuzu Algarad. And he actually does legally change his name to Pazuzu. And it was when he was in his 20s that he legally changed his name. Now, if you've never heard of the name Pazuzu, you are not alone. I had never heard of it either. But apparently, Pazuzu is a character from The Exorcist, and Pazuzu is the demon that possesses the 12-year-old in the book and the movie. And I'm not actually sure if Pazuzu is like a name of an actual demon. Like, I don't know. I'm not very clued up on stuff like that. So if it is, let me know in the comments. But yeah, Pazuzu is his new name. And he definitely changed his name to Pazuzu Algarad for shock value. He basically went about creating this character for himself that was scary. He wanted to be the scariest version of himself. He wanted to scare other people. And he really did get a kick out of scaring everybody in his very religious Christian town. Everyone truly did become terrified of him. And the more Pazuzu did, the more people became scared of him, and he really decided to run with this. Pazuzu thrived on offending people, essentially. He wanted to be controversial. He wanted people to be scared of him, to dislike him. He actually sounds very similar to Domina Cherry, who we covered last week. I kept thinking that Domina Cherry and Pazuzu, they would get along, and not in a good way. So anyway, Pazuzu, he started to get a bunch of tattoos that he knew would offend the people in his town. For example, he got Satan tattooed on his forearm. He also got 666 tattooed on him. He got Lucifer tattooed on him. He also had various other offensive symbols tattooed on him. Again, he stopped taking care of his own personal hygiene. He didn't shower. He didn't brush his teeth. I read that he only took a bath once a year. Yeah, let that sink in. Apparently the reason why he didn't shower was because cleaning yourself would strip the body of its natural defenses to illness and infections. Pazuzu also filed down his teeth into sharp fangs, essentially, because he wanted to emulate the vampires that he was obsessed with. And when I read that, I was like, oh my god, can you imagine the pain of filing down your teeth into fangs? Oh my god, the nerve endings. Oh, he was also high on meth when he filed down his teeth. I assume so he didn't feel the pain, but I'm sure he probably felt the pain afterwards. But he filed down his teeth into fangs so it would be easier to bite into animals and drink their blood, and also probably bite into people and drink their blood. He also split his tongue down the middle so that it resembled a snake, which, oh my god, I can't even think about it. He also started to make up various stories about his background to seem more scary and more like a villain, like a mythical character. He would tell people that his mom was a Satanist, that his dad was some sort of high priest from Iraq. Pazuzu also told people that he had started following the teachings of Islam. Again, he did this to scare people because this was literally just after 9/11 and there was a lot of Islamophobia going about and he wanted to scare people. So he told everyone that he was Muslim, which of course he wasn't. He also started to model his behavior on people like Charles Manson. He admired how these famous cult leaders controlled people. And in true cult leader style, Pazuzu made up his own religion, which is just baffling, isn't it? He's literally telling people that he's a Satanist, that he's a Muslim, but now he's also creating his own religion. And his new religion that he created was based upon the religion Sumerian, which involved him performing monthly dark moon sacrifices, which would take the form of him sacrificing an animal and drinking their blood. So basically, Pazuzu is somebody that just wants to be controversial, he wants to offend people, and he wants to do everything in his power to stand out. So Pazuzu had created this whole new character for himself and he was showing off his new character to all of his new friends and they all thought that it was amazing. But what happened next? Well, Pazuzu decided to turn his home into a huge party spot. He invited pretty much everyone that he knew to hang out at his home and it became known as the Knob Hill House, not just because Pazuzu was a giant knob, but because the house was located at 2749 Knob Hill Drive. And this would unfortunately turn into kind of a house of horrors. I also want to point out that Pazuzu still lives with his mom. Yeah, this is not Pazuzu's house. This is his mom, Cynthia's house. So Pazuzu is currently in his late 20s and his mom, just like when he was younger, his mom lets him do whatever he wants to. So Pazuzu has turned her whole house into a party house and she just doesn't care. She just gave him a free pass on everything. And Pazuzu just took over the home. And this house turned into the craziest house I think I've ever come across. Like the things that went on in this house, oh my God. And I just want you all to remember that everything I say about this house, Pazuzu's mom, Cynthia, is living there. So Pazuzu would invite everyone that he knew to this home. So there would constantly be 20 to 30 people in this house at one time. They would hang out, they would drink, they would do drugs. There was a lot of psychedelic drugs being taken. And Pazuzu wanted to create an environment where people felt free, where people felt like they were not judged and that people can dress how they want, say what they want, do whatever they want. Which, you know what? That doesn't necessarily sound like a bad place. However, he wanted people to be able to act out their deepest, darkest fetishes and fantasies. If they wanted to do something illegal, go ahead. No problem. If they wanted to trash the house, they could. If they wanted to smash a TV, they could. If they wanted to smash a beer bottle over someone's head, they could. If they wanted to have sex with someone in front of everyone, they could. There were zero rules to this home. But that's not the worst of it. Oh no. People also decided that, you know what? I want to go to the bathroom in front of everyone in the corner of the room. And I wish I was joking there. People would literally go to the bathroom on the carpet in front of people. So they would pee on the carpet, but then also they would go into the corner, squat, and have a poo. Why? Why? Why would anyone want to do that? But the worst of that, no one would clean up. I know, just imagine the smell. But anything goes at Pazuzu's house. And I really do question people. Who the hell would want to do a poo in the corner of a room in front of people? But as you can imagine, the house with no rules, that you could do anything inside of this house, it soon started to attract hundreds of people. And as time went on, the more people that started to turn up at the house, things just kept getting more and more out of hand. And obviously people arriving at this house now, they didn't know Pazuzu. So Pazuzu would give them a welcoming. He would introduce himself to them. He would say that he's a Satanist, that he has powers, and he would start to perform animal sacrifices to new people that would arrive at the home. He would then use his fangs and drink the blood of these animals in front of people. Now, I don't know about any of you, but if someone did that in front of me, I'd be like, I'm gonna go. But people were fascinated by this. People would see him literally bite into an animal and drink their blood, and they would cheer him on. And I'm not sure if the animals were alive or dead at the time when Pazuzu would bite into them to drink their blood. Like, I just don't know, but oh god. Pazuzu even started to bite into his own arm to drink his own blood, as well as asking if he could bite into other people's arm and drink their blood, which people gladly let him do. And all of a sudden there would be these crazy orgies happening where everyone would be having sex and people would be biting into each other, drinking each other's blood. No. And I just want to remind you all that Pazuzu doesn't shower. Yeah, let that sit with you. And the house just started to completely deteriorate because no one was taking care of the house. No one was cleaning, no one was tidying up. There was no maintenance being done on this house, and people were literally trashing the place. There was blood smeared on the walls. Everything was damp and moldy. There was human feces in the corner. People would just wee all over the carpet as well, so you've got all of that and the smell of that. There is also 5 dogs living in this house as well, and they would defecate and urinate on the carpet just anywhere. There were rodents, maggots, flies. Oh god, why would anyone want to go in this house? I do not know. There were also dead animals in the house as well that no one ever thought to clean up. And I assume that these dead animals were unfortunately from the sacrifices. There were dead animals outside of the home as well, in the front yard, the backyard. There was apparently even a dead cat hung up in a tree outside of the house. There was graffiti all over the house. There were signs on the outside of the house that said no trespassing and no gang members allowed. It's just really weird, isn't it? No trespassing and no gang members allowed. But you can poop in a corner. That's okay. Satanic imagery was also all over the house. Pentagrams were spray painted on the walls inside of the house. There was also inverted crosses. There were images of Satan, the devil. The words "evil will triumph" were painted on the front door. There was trash everywhere, all inside of the house, all outside of the house. Black metal music was being blasted at full volume 24 hours a day, and the neighbors started to become affected by the smell of the house. Neighbors would have to keep their windows closed because the smell was that bad. And you're probably wondering, well, why didn't they report them? Well, it was because they were all scared of Pazuzu. They all genuinely thought that he had powers and that he would curse them. Plus, he was a pretty scary person anyway. He was very volatile. God knows what he was capable of. No one actually wanted to turn him in. And remember, Pazuzu's mom is there the whole time. Yeah, she is there throughout the sex parties, the blood drinking, the animal sacrifice. Cynthia didn't care. She just said that as long as Pazuzu and all of his friends didn't go into her room, she didn't care. So Cynthia basically just locked herself in her room and never really ventured out into the house. Ironic really, isn't it? Because it's kind of like the roles have reversed. Because when Pazuzu was a young child, Cynthia would have sex parties and she would have sex around him, and Pazuzu would be the one locked in his room all of the time. Well, now that's kind of what Cynthia is experiencing. Pazuzu is now the one having the wild sex parties and Cynthia is the one locked in her room. And I do place some of the blame here on Cynthia because at the end of the day she is Pazuzu's mom and she is living in this house. And obviously we haven't gotten onto like the main things of what happened in today's case, but if Cynthia had just done something to control her son, none of this case would have happened. Like, why is she letting Pazuzu do whatever he wants? And as time passed, people from all over the country were traveling to the crazy party house. People would praise Pazuzu for allowing them to do whatever they wanted. And I think the people that he was attracting were people that were outcasts, that were ignored by society, that were forgotten. So I think all of these people from wherever they're traveling from finally felt like they belonged somewhere, and they praised Pazuzu for giving them that sense of belonging, for giving them that community that they had never had before. But Pazuzu loved all of this attention and he used it to his advantage. He saw that people looked up to him. People did really bow down at his feet. I've never seen anything like it. Like, truly, it is like a cult leader. Growing up, Pazuzu was always the outcast himself. He never had many friends. He was very lonely, very isolated. And now he had all of these people worshipping him and he loved it. He loved putting on a show. And because Pazuzu had all of this power over the people in his home, he started to manipulate them, control them, to see how far he could push them. How much did they worship him? He was very charming when he wanted to be. When Pazuzu wanted to drink anybody's blood, they would give it to him. If he wanted anyone to commit a crime for him, they would also happily do it. It's just crazy how much power he seemed to have over people. And it wasn't just male followers that Pazuzu had. Oh no. He attracted a lot of women as well. And this is just so bizarre, but a lot of the women that he came into contact with, they literally fell for him. Like, literally, they fell in love with him. And Pazuzu around this time was entering his 30s, and a lot of the women that he was attracting were in their late teenage years. They were 18, 19, maybe early 20s. So a hell of a lot younger than him. A lot more vulnerable, a lot more naive, easy to control and manipulate. Pazuzu would manipulate their young, impressionable mind and he would encourage nudity. He would have sex with all of these young women literally at the same time. Like, he would have sex with one, then another, then another, and another. And I just want to remind you all that he doesn't shower. Again, his favorite thing, he would orchestrate huge orgies with as many people as he possibly could. Everyone in that house was involved. And why anyone would want to have sex in a house where there's rodents running around and maggots and everything's moldy and there's poo in the corner, I do not know. And then next, in true typical cult leader fashion, he decided to make a lot of the women that followed him into his wives or fiancés. What is it with cult leaders? Like, why do they want multiple wives? Like, why? Pazuzu didn't legally marry any of these women. He would just refer to them all as his spiritual wives or fiancés. And I don't actually know how many he had. I couldn't find an exact number. However, I do know that he had two, and I think these were the two main ones. And these two spiritual wives are actually very significant for the rest of today's case. So first was a woman called Amber Birch. She was born on the 2nd of January 1990, making her a Capricorn. And it has been described that she had a very happy childhood. She did well at school. She absolutely adored horses, which her family owned, and she would quite often have her friends around and they would go riding. And in 2008, she graduated high school, so she's 18 years old. And this is when she first met Pazuzu Algarad for the first time. She was 18 and he was 30. And she entered into a relationship with Pazuzu. And this is where everything went downhill for Amber. Her friends and family have just said that she completely changed. Overnight, she just changed. She also stopped taking care of herself. She stopped showering. She started taking drugs for the very first time, drinking excessively. She also filed her teeth into fangs just like Pazuzu, as well as stating on Facebook that she was legally married to Pazuzu, which of course she wasn't. And she basically just cut off all of her friends and family, like her old life completely cut off, and she was 100% dedicated, worshipped Pazuzu. And the second of Pazuzu's wives that we know about was a woman called Crystal Matlock. And we actually don't know too much about Crystal. We know that she was born in 1987, so she was approximately 21 years old when she first met Pazuzu. And again, it was probably a very similar situation as Amber, because we know that Crystal was completely taken in by Pazuzu as well. She completely fell for his charm. She thought that he was a hero, a savior. She worshipped him. And obviously Crystal and Amber, they were the wives, you know. He probably had other fiancés as well. It's just all so messed up. It literally is just like a mini cult going on in this house. And as time passes, Pazuzu continues on throwing these crazy parties, and we are now in 2009. And this is when Facebook was becoming more widely known and used by most people. And word quickly spread on social media about these crazy parties. So then this generated more people arriving at the home. But when we get to 2009, this is when things take a much darker turn. I mean, they're already pretty dark anyway because we have criminal activity going on. There's drug taking, there is assaults, animal sacrifice and torture. Pazuzu is completely terrorizing the neighborhood, but now it gets worse because Pazuzu now starts to demonstrate a more violent side. It's almost like something changed in Pazuzu. Was it that the power got to his head? Was it the fact that Facebook and social media, the word spread about him, so he did start to become more well known in the area? Was it just purely the fact that so many years had passed and he was just able to get away with whatever he wanted? I don't know, but just something changed in 2009. So now when people would come to the house, Pazuzu would make sure that he showed people his weapons collection, which was a bunch of knives and a bunch of guns. He actually had guns stashed in the dishwasher, of all places. And it was in 2009 where Pazuzu started to brag about the fact that he had killed people. Now, when he told people this, people just kind of like laughed it off because they were just like, oh, he likes to do things for shock value. He's always going over the top, making things up. It's just Pazuzu. But Pazuzu would have stories that he murdered multiple homeless people just for fun, and then also that he killed 2 sex workers before eating their flesh, then burning their bodies and burying their bodies in his backyard. But people didn't believe him. He was always saying things like this. He would also threaten guests with his weapons. He would order them around at knife point. He would tell guests that he was holding people captive in the basement. And when people would arrive at the house, they would comment on the smell of the house because, oh my God, can you imagine the smell? And people have actually said that the house smelled like death. So when people would arrive at the house and they would say, whoa, it smells like death in here, Pazuzu would just say, it's because of the bodies in the basement. He would also tell guests that if they didn't comply with what he wanted, they would also end up in the basement, either captive or dead. Now you would think with the smell of the house alone, but you would think all of this talk about violence and all of the threats to the guests and the fact that Pazuzu was talking about the fact that he had murdered multiple people, you would think that that would put people off going. But no, it was almost like it became more of an attraction. And I think, if I'm being completely honest, I think people just turned a blind eye to what Pazuzu was doing because they wanted drugs. A lot of the people that were at this house, they were addicts. And I don't really think they cared about Pazuzu, like what he had done. I don't think they cared. I don't think that they were necessarily scared of him either. They just wanted drugs and they just wanted an environment where they could take drugs freely. So some people didn't take him seriously because he did like to do things for shock value, but then the people that did take him seriously didn't really seem to care enough either. And in 2009, 2 guests would visit Pazuzu's house for the first time. 2 men called Joshua Wetzler and Tommy Welch. And these 2 men are very significant to today's case. So Josh Wetzler, at the time of this case, was 32 years old. He was born in Mocksville, North Carolina, and after high school, he met his girlfriend, Stacy Carter, at a music festival. The 2 of them hit it off immediately. They entered into a very serious relationship and they both shared a love of horses. And in 2002, the couple actually bought a property and some land to have a load of horses and to kind of have like a rehabilitation center for horses and like just look after them. And it wasn't long until the couple went on to have a son together, a little boy called Jared. However, as the construction on the property progressed, the couple found themselves in financial difficulties. So to try and make a little bit more money, Josh started a horse hoof trimming business. And things were kind of looking up, at least they were turning a corner. But then one day, Josh ordered some psychedelic mushrooms in the post and he got caught. And because the mushrooms had crossed state lines, this was a felony charge. And after this, his life just completely fell apart because he had a felony charge. He could no longer get clients. No one wanted to work with him. He also couldn't get a job. And Stacey soon left him. She took their son with him and got full custody of their son. And Josh was only allowed to see his son under restricted visitation. And pretty much everything in Josh's life had gone wrong. Like from one stupid mistake, his whole life just completely fell apart. He became an outcast from society. He struggled financially. He was forced into selling drugs just to make some money to survive. And he was getting involved with not the nicest people. And this is when he first got introduced to Pazuzu Algarad. And then the second man was Tommy Welch. He was in his 30s at the time of this case taking place. He was the eldest of 3 boys and he grew up in Arkansas. And he was really good with cars. Like that was his passion. He loved taking cars apart, putting them back together. He was really close with his brothers. He was an uncle to 2 young children who he absolutely adored. He also lived a pretty clean life. He was never into drugs. He was just a family man. He was dedicated to his family and he absolutely loved them. However, in 2009, for reasons unknown, we actually don't know how Tommy and Pazuzu met, but they did. And again, this would result in devastating consequences for Tommy. And it was in the summer of 2009 where Josh found a job at a Renaissance festival, which was a traveling festival. And even though Josh's probation prevented him from traveling, he still took the job. So one day, Josh is visiting his son, Jared. Josh and Stacey, his ex, the mother of his child, they seem to be on good terms right now. And on this visit, they had a really good time. Josh made pizzas for the family. However, after this visit, Stacey and Jared never saw Josh again. Jared never saw his dad again. It was almost like Josh just dropped off the face of the earth. Josh never phoned them, he never visited, and Stacey thought that because Josh had violated his probation terms because of the festival that he was working at, she thought that maybe Josh had gone on the run and that is why he was laying low. So Stacey kind of really didn't think too much about the fact that he had just disappeared. And then on the 3rd of October 2009, so this is a few months after the disappearance of Josh, Tommy Welch spent the day with his family. He spent the day with his brothers and his sister-in-laws and his nephew and niece, and they had a really nice day together as a family. And then the family made plans to meet back up later on that evening at Tommy's brother's house. They planned to put the kids to bed, watch a movie and eat a pizza. So Tommy went home after the day out and he spent some time on his own, and when he was due to go back to his brother's house on the evening, he never showed up. His family tried to call him. He never answered. The family went round to Tommy's home. He wasn't there. And this was not like Tommy at all because Tommy was such a family man. He would do anything for his family and he loved spending time with his family. Like he would have been there on that evening, but he had just disappeared. And the days turned into weeks. And Tommy's brothers searched high and low in the local area. They walked through the woods. They spoke to as many people as they could, but Tommy was nowhere to be found. Tommy Welch, just like Joshua Wetzler before him, had also completely disappeared. And were these disappearances a coincidence? No. There was one person at the center of their disappearances. And of course, that is Pazuzu Algarad. Now, after the disappearances of Josh and Tommy, did Pazuzu keep a low profile? No, of course he didn't. He continued on throwing his wild parties and he started to brag to people that he had just murdered 2 more men. Literally, Pazuzu is shouting it from the rooftop that he is a murderer. He would tell people that there were more bodies in his basement and that he had killed 2 more men after a disagreement. In fact, he even told guests that he had dismembered bodies in his basement and that he had put cat litter and bleach down to hide the smell. And then he had buried the dismembered bodies in his backyard with the help of his 2 wives, Amber and Crystal. And Pazuzu told pretty much every single person that entered his home about this. But did any of them do anything? Did any of them go to the police? No. Instead, they thought it was just one big joke and they just thought that Pazuzu was just putting on a show. In fact, there was one woman that was forced to go over to Pazuzu's house. This woman is called Sylvia. She didn't want to go there. She was dragged there by a friend. And when she went into Pazuzu's home, she was forced by Pazuzu to watch a homemade porn film of Pazuzu and his wives. And in the film, Pazuzu was wearing a bandana covered in blood. And that bandana actually belonged to a person that he had murdered. Just no one knew about it at the time. But we'll get back to that shortly. In the meantime, months go by and no one comes knocking at Pazuzu's door to investigate the disappearance of Tommy and Josh. And during this time, Pazuzu got in trouble with the law in various other ways. He was convicted of larceny, but only received probation. He was also charged with assaulting a woman. Again, he was only given probation. On top of this, Pazuzu also assaulted his own mother. I feel like I need to stress this again, but Cynthia, Pazuzu's mom, is living in the house when all of this is going on. So one time, Cynthia had angered Pazuzu in some kind of way. God knows what she did. And Pazuzu got her in a chokehold and started strangling her so hard that she actually couldn't breathe. So Cynthia reported him to the police and Pazuzu was arrested. However, Cynthia dropped the charges and Pazuzu got away with this. And then on another occasion, one of Pazuzu's wives, Amber, was also arrested for slapping and repeatedly beating Cynthia. But once again, Cynthia didn't press charges and Amber didn't get into trouble with this. And it's just crazy how many times Pazuzu actually gets in trouble with the law, but he only gets probation. Bear that in mind. So now it is early 2010. This is approximately 6 months after Josh Wetzler originally disappeared. So in that 6 months, police had actually found Josh's abandoned car. So this would indicate that Josh may be missing. However, the police decided not to inform Stacy, the mother of his child, about the fact that they had found his abandoned car and that he might be missing. So Stacy this whole time just thought that Josh was on the run. But then after 6 months, she started to hear all of these rumors that a man called Pazuzu had murdered Josh and that he had buried him in his backyard. And she was thinking, no way, no way, surely there is no way that Josh is dead. However, even though she didn't believe these rumors, Stacy still went to the police. And it turns out that the police had also heard these rumors. Yeah, the police had heard the rumors that Pazuzu Algarad was responsible for the disappearance of Josh. But not just that. The police had also heard rumors that Pazuzu could be involved with the disappearance of another man called Tommy Welch. And it's just like, okay, so you've heard these rumors. Why are you not doing anything? So the police, in the end, decide to go out and search Pazuzu's property for Josh and also Tommy. So on the 23rd of February 2010, the police show up to Pazuzu's home with a search warrant. So they made their way to Pazuzu's backyard, but there was one problem. They didn't have the proper equipment to carry out the search. Apparently, and I really want to stress that, apparently, they couldn't get their hands on it on that day. They didn't have like the proper radar, scanner, ground things. I don't know the exact name for it, but they didn't have all the proper scanners to scan underground to see if there is something there. They just didn't have the proper equipment to actually check to see if there was anything underground and then dig the ground up if there was. And I just keep thinking, well, if you didn't have the proper equipment, come back another day. It really is that simple. I mean, it might not be that simple. They may have to do some more paperwork. Oh, God forbid people actually doing their job, but it's like, come back when you have the proper equipment. But they didn't. All they did, the police that were there, they went to the backyard and they started just kicking up a bit of the grass with their feet, like, you know, just lifting up some of the dirt. And they did have sniffer dogs with them and they just made the dogs sniff the ground that they had kicked up. But guess what? Because of all of the overwhelming scent from Pazuzu's home, the sniffer dogs couldn't pick up anything because everything literally smelled like death. So the police were like, well, the dogs haven't picked up anything, so there's clearly no bodies in the ground. Let's leave. They concluded that Pazuzu had nothing to do with the disappearance of Josh or Tommy. Wow, 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 wow. So a few more months go by and Pazuzu is still living the same crazy life with his whole sex cult parties in his home. He's bragging about the fact that he has gotten away with more murders, and I guarantee you he probably really did think that he had gotten away with more murders because the police had literally turned up at his house, searched the backyard and cleared him of any murders. But then in June of 2010, another body turns up. On the 7th of June 2010, the body of Joseph Chandler was found. Joseph had been reported missing by his mother a few days prior, and his body was found near a river that was near Pazuzu's house. And it was discovered that Joseph had died from a gunshot wound. Now, not much is known about Joseph's background. I really wish that I could tell you more. All I know is that he was legally blind, and his mother has described him as the most kind-hearted person you would ever meet. And she was absolutely devastated when she heard the news about her son. And the exact location where Joseph's body was found was the exact location that Pazuzu would often go to torture and sacrifice animals. And because Pazuzu was pretty well known in the local area, it didn't take the police too long to link the death of Joseph Chandler to Pazuzu. The shooting of Joseph Chandler was also linked back to another person called Nicholas Ritzy. And it turns out that Pazuzu and Nicholas were hanging out by the river. Joseph was also there at the river, and we don't actually know how Pazuzu and Nicholas met Joseph, but somehow the three of them had met earlier on in that day. Pazuzu and Nicholas had convinced Joseph to get in their car. Then they drove Joseph to this river. They were apparently all hanging out, or we just don't know. And then all of a sudden, Joseph was shot. Now, Nicholas was actually the one that pulled the trigger. However, Pazuzu was the one to get the gun from the car. And then after they had shot Joseph in cold blood, Pazuzu and Nicholas fled the scene, and Pazuzu allowed Nicholas to hide out in his home. However, in the end, Pazuzu and Nicholas were tracked down. They were both found at Pazuzu's home and they were both arrested. However, after being questioned, Nicholas claimed that the shooting was just an accident, and the police believed him. Nicholas confessed that he was the one that pulled the trigger accidentally, and he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, and he was sent to prison for 13 months. Yeah, not 13 years, 13 months. Now, Pazuzu was charged with being an accessory to involuntary manslaughter. Now, when it came to Pazuzu's trial, the authorities treated Joseph's mother disgustingly because Joseph's mother wanted to be there at the trial. She wanted to be at the trial for one of the people responsible for her son's death, or should I say murder. She wanted to be at the trial. However, the authorities, the police, they were messing her around. They kept telling her, oh, you don't need to come to the trial. Oh, it's not necessary for you to come to the trial. Don't come to the trial. And then they kept messing her around of when the trial was actually going to be. They were saying, oh, sorry, yeah, the trial's not actually going to start today. Yeah, there's been a little bit of a mix-up. They were just messing her around so much, and I find that so suspicious. Why didn't they want Joseph's mom at the trial? I don't know, there are so many suspicious things in this case, I'm telling you. And in the end, for Pazuzu's involvement for the shooting of Joseph Chandler, Pazuzu was found guilty of being an accessory to involuntary manslaughter, but he was just given probation. Yeah, this repeated offender is only given probation for accessory to involuntary manslaughter. Now that just doesn't make sense. How many times is Pazuzu just given probation? There is something fishy going on here, and you cannot convince me of anything else. And I think it's safe to say that the shooting of Joseph Chandler was not an accident. It was murder. And Joseph's mom also thinks that. It's just so suspicious. If it was accidental, why didn't Pazuzu or Nicholas phone it in? If it truly, genuinely was an accident, why didn't they report it? Why did they go on the run? Why did they hide? And also, I am not 100% convinced that it was Nicholas that pulled the trigger. We know how much Pazuzu has control over people. He would quite often convince people to commit crime for him. I wouldn't be surprised if Pazuzu was the one to pull the trigger himself, or maybe he made Nicholas pull the trigger. However, it's gone down as involuntary manslaughter, and I just think that that is absolutely disgusting. The way Joseph's mom was treated and the whole case of Joseph Chandler has been handled so poorly, so disrespectfully, and there has been no justice in the case of Joseph Chandler. So we now get to 2011. Cynthia has been putting up with her son's nonsense for years, and she had had enough. She wanted to put an end to all of this. She had been basically living inside her locked room for years, letting Pazuzu do whatever he wanted. Well, now that was about to change, because in November of 2011, 2 whole years since Josh and Tommy first disappeared, Cynthia went to the police and told them that she had witnessed a murder with her own eyes, and the murder was committed by her own son Pazuzu, along with one of his wives, Amber Birch. And when she told the police this, the police were like, well, okay, we can't just take your word for it though. We need your permission to search your home, because at the end of the day, it is Cynthia's home. And unbelievably, Cynthia said no. Cynthia said no, the police could not search her home. And I'm like, what the actual hell? What the bloody hell? What was the point in you going to the police in the first place? Well, Cynthia was apparently scared of Pazuzu, and she was apparently scared that if she let someone come and search the home, Pazuzu would get angry, and I think she knows what he's capable of. So she refused the police's request to search the home, and unbelievably, the police just went, okay then. They just accepted this. They didn't press Cynthia any further. They didn't go out and get a search warrant themselves. Again, I find this so suspicious. There have been multiple reports that there are bodies in the backyard of this home. Cynthia, who is the homeowner, has now gone to the police to report that her son murdered somebody in front of her. Kind of seems like someone may have known what Pazuzu was up to and was trying to cover for him. But I'm not pointing any fingers. And 3 more years pass. It's unbelievable. Pazuzu carries on being a complete arsehole, bragging to everyone that he is a murderer, that he has gotten away with so many murders, that he is a serial killer. And I just don't understand how so many people are scared of Pazuzu. It seems like the police are scared of him. The neighborhood is scared of him. His own family, his mom is scared of him. And every single person that enters his home is scared of him. So when is all of this going to end? Well, thankfully, it is now all about to end, because there was one person that didn't seem to be scared of Pazuzu. So it is now October 2014. News about Pazuzu murdering people and burying them in his backyard had reached one of his old friends, a man called Matt Flowers. Now, Matt and Pazuzu were really close friends a very long time ago, before Pazuzu went really off the rails. However, Pazuzu had started going off the rails, and he was dragging Matt down with him. And Matt was like, nope, I need to get out of this situation. I cannot let Pazuzu ruin my life. So he joined the US Army and he served in Iraq. And it was a few years down the line in 2014, when Matt was home, that he started to hear all of these rumors about his old friend Pazuzu and the fact that he had murdered people and buried them in his backyard. And Matt was like, no, this cannot continue. Someone needs to do something about this. So Matt went to the police, and Matt, because he was a war veteran, the police actually took him seriously, and the police finally decide to do their job. And this time, when the police went to Pazuzu's house of horrors at 2749 Nob Hill Drive, they took all of the right equipment. And finally, after 5 years of being missing, and after 4.5 years after the police did that half-hour search of Pazuzu's backyard, the police finally found the bodies of Josh Wetzler and Tommy Welch. And it turns out that they had both been in shallow graves this whole time. And the fact that they were in such shallow graves, it's like, how did the police not find them the first time? And if the police hadn't found the bodies of Josh and Tommy the first time, Pazuzu would have been arrested right there and then Joseph Chandler may not have been murdered, or should I say killed, accidentally. Pazuzu Pazuzu hadn't been subtle at all. The police really dropped the ball, like seriously, really dropped the ball on this one. And after 5 years of getting away with murder, Pazuzu Algarad was finally arrested along with his 2 wives, Amber Birch and Crystal Matlock. So after the arrest, the police did a thorough search on the house, and oh my God, this house. This case broke in the media, and video footage of the house was released in the media, so then it was released to the public. And the public saw the video of the inside of Pazuzu's house, and everyone was just horrified. This house is so disgusting. Like, there's trash everywhere, there's things broken everywhere, there's blood smeared over the walls, spray paint, graffiti, satanic imagery. And when it broke in the media, we all know what the media is like. When anything is Satan or Satanists, they run with it. However, a lot of people were blaming the devil for all of this, and I'm like, no. Blame Pazuzu. Pazuzu is the one responsible for this. And also Amber and Crystal, they were named the wives of Satan. And during this media frenzy, the police were trying to figure out, how did Josh and Tommy even end up at this house? Like, what happened there? The police were trying to gather as much evidence as they could. They were talking to as many people as they could. However, Pazuzu and his wives, they were not saying much. However, from testimony of other people that were at the home and just evidence that they found in the house, the police put together what they think happened. So in the summer of 2009, Pazuzu had a falling out with Josh, which resulted in Pazuzu shooting Josh a total number of 7 times in the head and in the torso. He then dragged Josh's body down to the basement, where he dismembered Josh's body, and then he buried Josh's body in the backyard with the help of his 2 wives, Amber and Crystal. Now, how Josh and Pazuzu even knew each other and what they had fallen out over, no one really knows. And then in October of 2009, after another disagreement between Tommy and Pazuzu, it was determined that Tommy was shot in the back of the head when he was sat on Pazuzu's couch. However, this time it wasn't Pazuzu that had fired the shot. It was actually his wife, Amber. And then after Tommy had been murdered, Pazuzu and Amber buried his body in the backyard. Again, we just don't know how Tommy and Pazuzu knew each other. Tommy didn't do drugs. Tommy wasn't in that world. How did Tommy go from spending the day with his family, going home for a few hours, and then he was supposed to go back and hang out with his family? How did he all of a sudden end up at Pazuzu's home? These are questions that I don't think we will ever get the answers to. And then remember when we talked about Pazuzu wearing that bandana that was soaked in blood in that homemade porn film that he had? Well, that bandana belonged to Josh, and Pazuzu had started wearing that bandana after he had murdered him. So now the police had kind of figured out what had happened. Pazuzu and Amber were both charged with murder, and Crystal was charged as an accessory. And all 3 are held in jail awaiting trial. However, Pazuzu never actually went to trial, because on the 28th of October 2015, Pazuzu was found dead in his cell. He was found unresponsive with a deep wound in his arm, and it was determined that he had bled to death from this wound in his arm. Now, Pazuzu was on suicide watch, so he was supposed to be monitored 24/7. He was not allowed any sharp objects. So it's like, well, how was he able to commit suicide then? Well, it is thought, not confirmed, but it is thought that Pazuzu actually was biting into his own arm with his sharp teeth, and he had created such a big wound that he ended up bleeding to death. However, I do just want to stress that that has not been confirmed. An autopsy couldn't determine the exact cause of death, so it's not known. Did Pazuzu actually bite into his own arm and create such a big wound that he bled to death? Did somebody else participate, maybe handed him something to commit suicide? There are actually rumors that staff in the prison allowed him, maybe even helped him commit suicide, but those are just rumours. So obviously Pazuzu could no longer stand trial, and the worst thing about all of this is that Pazuzu is the only one that has answers to so many questions, and now those questions will forever go unanswered. But now we need to turn our attention to his wives Amber and Crystal. Well, they never actually went to trial either, because in March of 2017 Amber Birch pleaded guilty to second-degree murder of Tommy Welch, as well as pleading guilty to being an accessory to the murder of Joshua Wetzler, and she was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years in prison. And Crystal Matlock also pleaded guilty to being an accessory to the murder of Joshua Wetzler, and she was sentenced to a minimum of 3 years. And as for Pazuzu's mom, Cynthia was obviously basically locked in her room for years. She witnessed a murder. She allowed Pazuzu to do whatever he wanted. Well, after this case, Cynthia has refused to talk, like no one even knows anything about her. And in the aftermath of this case, authorities entered Pazuzu's home wearing hazmat suits because the home was so disgusting and dangerous to the health of the people searching the home. And oh my god, this house, it is Erica Murray all over again. I cannot believe it. There was trash everywhere, inside, outside. There was human feces everywhere, urine in the carpets, blood all over the walls. There was also animal carcasses everywhere in that house. There was also dead animals in cages. It's honestly disgusting. And the house was deemed unfit for anyone to live in, and it was demolished. And that brings us to the end of this case. However, I still have so many questions. There are so many suspicious things in today's case. I have so many questions for the police of the local area. Why did they refuse to believe people reporting the murders, reporting the disappearances? Why did they refuse to believe anybody? Why did Pazuzu keep getting lenient sentences when he was convicted? Why did he keep getting probation for his multiple charges? He was found guilty of being an accessory to involuntary manslaughter. Who the hell gets probation for that, especially when they are a repeated offender? Why was everyone in the neighborhood so scared of him that no one reported him? Why did the police refuse to get a search warrant when Cynthia went to them and reported a murder that she had seen with her own eyes? Why did the police go to Pazuzu's home in the first place without the proper equipment? How is it that the police didn't find the bodies of Josh and Tommy the first time around? And why was Pazuzu allowed to commit suicide in jail? There is something fishy going on with this case. And there are also rumours that Pazuzu was a serial killer. However, if we just go by the reported facts on this case, well, Pazuzu is not a serial killer because he technically only killed Joshua Wetzler with his own hands. However, Pazuzu bragged about other murders that he had committed. He had apparently murdered homeless people, and he had also apparently murdered 2 sex workers. And who's to say that he wasn't the one that murdered Tommy Welch? That he wasn't the one that pulled the trigger on Joseph Chandler? But what is just so heartbreaking is that there are so many unanswered questions for the families of the victims of today's story. Joshua Wetzler was described as a kind and caring man who worked hard throughout his whole life. He was absolutely adored by his young son Jared, and he had so much to look forward to in his future, and he was taken far, far too young. He was only 32 years old. Tommy Welch was described as an amazing person. He was incredibly close with his family. He loved hanging out with his brothers and his young nephews and nieces. His favourite thing to do was spend time with them, and he as well was taken far, far too soon. He was only 30 years old. And then finally, Joseph Chandler was described as the most kind-hearted man you would ever meet. He would do anything to help anyone, and he is hugely missed by his mother. And he was also taken far, far too soon. He was also only 30 years old. But my heart goes out to every single family member, friend of the victims of today's case. And that brings us to the end of the case on Pazuzu Algarad, also known as the Satanist in the suburbs. So As always, let me know your thoughts, theories, and opinions, especially on today's case, because bloody hell, there are so many suspicious things in today's case. There are so many rumors surrounding today's case. So let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. And also don't forget to let me know your case suggestions in the comments, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to Heyday for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget you can check out the game using the link in my description box. And that is everything from me. So I'll see you in my next video. Bye.